Welcome to Pet Parlor on the podcast. This is your host, Timothy Case, and this podcast is to bring information to you, whether you have a dog, cat, horse, fish, lizard, bird, whatever it may be. This is a podcast for you, and basic pet care and information on how to take care of your said pet. Now, keep in mind, I'm not a 100% professional. This is all opinionated piece on it. But nevertheless, I'm here to help you and to help understand what's going on. If you feel like I said something that you don't agree with or you want to correct me in any way, please contact me at Tim Case, that's TIMCASE 17 at gmail.com, and I'll be able to answer your question and figure out the issue. Or if you have any questions about the episode or upcoming episodes that I'm going to do, please email me that way. Today's episode is pretty much Pets 101. What's going to be the cheapest pet? What's the basic things that you're going to need for each pet? We're going to start with some of the cheapest pets when it comes to the pet itself. So far what I've seen is fish tend to be the cheapest as the pet itself, ranging anywhere from, say, $2 to $3 all the way up to $100 depending on the rarity of the fish. That being said, because of the rarity of fish, it could be an exotic fish, and therefore that's the reason why it's expensive. Next is birds. I've seen some birds like zebra finches and that go as low as $14, and then it goes up. After that, it's small animals, and this could be hamsters, mice, guinea pigs, stuff like that. And I've seen those hamsters and mice mostly down to $14. That being said, small animals can get into the higher price range depending on what you're getting, such as ferrets and chinchillas. That being said, make sure that in your state you are allowed to have such a pet, or that if you need a permit to own that pet, that you have the necessary permits and regulations for it. Next is lizards. A bearded dragon itself can go from about $25, and other lizards tend to be a little bit more expensive, but bearded dragons tend to be the cheapest on that end. That being said, make sure that you have a permit depending on the type of lizard that you have, and also make sure that it's allowed in the state that you live in. Next is cats. Cats you can actually get in adoption center for a lot cheaper than dogs. Cats are very easy, simple to take care of, and depending on the breed, it does tend to be really expensive. Bambinos, which is one of the most expensive ones, can run up to $600. That being said, there are some cats that wind up putting into the exotic stage, and therefore you might need a permit for that. The next one's dogs, and dogs tend to be an expensive pet as the dog itself. The cheapest way of getting a dog is most likely excuse me, is most likely going to a dog shelter or a humane society, something like that. That's probably the cheapest. You won't have a choice of selecting a breed of dog, but nevertheless, you will be able to get a dog and save a dog from some shelters. Some shelters have a high kill rate, and this is both for cats and dogs, whereas other shelters is a no-kill shelter. That being said, you do have to worry if certain shelters tend to be a kill rate shelter. As far as maintenance is concerned, cats tend to be a low maintenance thing or animal. You'll have to go and get like bedding, or I say bedding because right on my mind is like guinea pigs and hamsters, but in reality you need to get litter and cat food. Nevertheless, a litter and cat food can actually go pretty cheap for the cat. Tidy Cat now, around the Christmas season, is going for around $10 on sale anyway. The most expensive that Tidy Cat winds up becoming in a big pail is $14. Nevertheless, there are those higher expensive kitty litters, and I'll get to that in another episode. And that's the same with food. There are fairly cheap foods, and depending on how your cat eats, what your cat likes, the issues that the cat may have, the cheapest can be through Friskies or Purina brands. Iams tends to also be a little bit cheaper than most other brands, such as Blue Buffalo, but nevertheless, it's still good. The next one that is kind of a cheaper to maintain are dogs. Dogs tend to be a little bit easier. You don't have to get litter, but nevertheless, you do have to pay for things like collars, harnesses, depending on the dog. Sometimes training because the dog needs to be a little bit more behaviored. And the dog food is kind of similar with cat food. Most dogs, you can actually go with a cheaper brand of dog food like Pedigree or Purina. That being said, you are getting a cheap dog food, and therefore it could cause some issues, some weight gain on the dog. That being said, I'll touch onto that subject in a later episode. And I'm planning on doing these episodes every week. Right now I'm recording it on Wednesday, and I'm planning on posting it today after listening to this. So if you have any suggestions, please let me know, and I'll be willing to try to enter it in. Excuse me. And if you have any suggestions of future shows, let me know. I am planning on touching base on every single type of animals, and maybe even go specific animals. The next is actually small animal. Small animals, you do have to change the litter bed inside, or the bedding. And it's a process. You do have to pay for the litter to get for them, and depending on what the type of litter you want to get, I usually suggest like paper bedding, because it's really easy for them, and some smaller mammals like to nest in it. As that being said, there's also feed for the small animal, and food for the animal is all depending on the type of animal you get. Obviously, the more rare the animals, such as ferrets and chinchillas, the more expensive the food is for them. And so you have to keep that in mind as you're planning on getting what small animal. Hamsters and mice tend to be really common, and therefore the feed is a lot cheaper. You also might want to get, say, toys for the small animal, whether it's a guinea pig, chinchilla, and sometimes hamsters, because they tend to like to chew things, and you don't want it to damage the cage itself or them getting really bored. Therefore, they have blocks, they have things like that. You want to get snacks for them and treats so that they're more likely to not bite you and more likely to be more tame around you. Because under technicality, some of these rodents, like hamsters, gerbils, mice, and that, they're not technically domesticated, they're tamed. Even though they call Fancy Mouse, and Fancy Mouse is domesticated, in reality, the domestication process is completely different, and I might touch that up on this episode. The next animal is actually fish. The tank for fish can get into a pricey area, and it's depending on the fish you get. If you're planning on just owning 1 to 2 fish, you can get a really small aquarium and a filter system, very, very cheap, sometimes under $100 to get all that. Food, you do have to feed fish daily, and it's depending on the fish that you're getting that sometimes you have to feed them daily. Looks like it's registering on the really low side, so I might have to re-record this, and I really don't want to. Anyway, sorry about my rant and rave there, but nevertheless, that being said, be sure to know what type of fish you're getting, what it feeds on. Some people like to get flakes, some people like to get pellets. Kind of one of the issues with fish, and it's the same with small animals, is if you're going on a trip for a long period of time, it's kind of hard to do a trip with fish as pets because you have to worry about feeding the pets and making sure that they are taken care of. That being said, they do make feeders, automatic feeders. Those do tend to get more expensive, anywhere between $40 to $50 and even more, depending on the brand of the feeder and the quality of the feeder. Or they do what's called 3-a-day, 5-a-day feeders, where it's pretty much a little block that you put in there and it slowly releases food throughout the day and throughout the week. That being said, there's some fish that wind up gorging themselves until they die, and you do have to be careful with that. Some fish, in particular, sometimes goldfish will do this. They will eat until they die. And depending on that as well, if you get a goldfish, one thing you want to keep in mind is that goldfish grows to the size of the tank. So if you think the goldfish is a little bit big for the tank, do not switch tanks. Do not get a bigger tank and put the fish in the bigger tank. Because when you put a goldfish into the bigger tank, the goldfish will grow to that tank. If you think he's starting to get a little bit too big of the tank, he's at perfect size. Next is birds. And the reason why birds get to be is a little bit higher of a maintenance is kind of similar with hamsters, guinea pigs, and chinchillas and that, the small animals. It's because that birds need attention. They crave attention. They need attention continuously. On top of that, they have to have the caretaking of like a small animal. You need to change the litter that is on the bottom or their little bed. You do, on some birds, have to have a separate nesting area instead of just a bed and perch. Specifically, small birds like finches and even parakeets would like to have kind of a cave-ish nest to nest in and sleep. That being said, they need attention, and they'll actually make noise if they're not being taken care of, in a sense, taken care of, not fed, not petted in any way. So what you need to do is, if it's a parakeet or a finch, at least 2 to 3 hours of attention to them. I know I'm kind of over-exaggerating on this. A lot of people say at least 1 hour, but seeing as that parakeets are a parrot, they do need to have a little bit more of attention to them because they are a very social bird and they want to have that social interaction. Birds also need to have toys in their cage, such as little ladders, bells, orange and red blocks, stuff like that, because with those you have to